Hello, I'm Christian Gomez for The New American. Recently, several conservative candidates running for office in Wisconsin spoke at a small rally held at the Freedom Project in Appleton, and members of the New American team were there capturing the event. Among the speakers was Senator Ron Johnson, and here's his presentation from that evening.
First of all, thank you for inviting me here. I was told in my briefing, let's face it, this last 11 and a half years has been kind of a blur. But apparently I addressed this school, this Freedom Project, about 10 years ago when you were first starting.
Yes, sir, exactly 10 years ago.
I know I would have wanted to do it because I love the first name, Freedom. I really enjoyed listening to Justice Kelly's description. I've never really heard it laid out that way, present or past, present, future. Let me take a few minutes to describe how I think how we went off the rails, and then open it up to questions until they give me the hook. I have a sense what you described in terms of the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary still works pretty well in the states. I think we probably maintained that balance. I think Dave would probably agree with that. Obviously, the legislature is the thing most connected to and representative of the people. And that's why our founders wanted it to be the most powerful branch. And I think the reason you've been able to maintain that balance on a state level is because state government has to balance their budgets. So that constrains them. So Dave can't go out there and pass all kinds of bills to give you benefits because he's going to have to at the same time raise your taxes. And that constrains him. That's not what happens in the federal government. We just print money. But it really all started going off the rails with FDR and the New Deal. There's Filburn and Wickard, I believe, is the Supreme Court decision where the Supreme Court literally ruled because you had the Roosevelt administration saying that a government agency could tell a farmer how much land he could actually farm on, how much wheat he could actually grow. And so that opened up a floodgate of the federal government usurping freedom from Americans and usurping freedom and the sovereignty of the states. So that's where it all started going downhill off the rails. But I think where it really went off the rails, and this is where I give this education institution a great deal of credit and why I would be so supportive of it, is in the 60s, as college administrations capitulated to the Vietnam War protesters and turned over their institutions to the radical left. And I'm talking the radical left. If you've ever dealt with anybody in the university system, I think, Duke, you have. I've dealt with some of the people at UWO. I wouldn't view them as garden variety Democrats. I view them as radical leftists. By the way, the Democratic Party is not the party of JFK. JFK would probably be one of the more conservative members of a Republican Senate conference today. He's for national defense, actually for tax cuts, wants to grow the economy. What a concept. But anyway, so now we've got the radical left taking over our university systems completely. I mean, there are a couple institutions, Hillsdale, but I view three colleges that are the most important: colleges of law, colleges of journalism, colleges of education. Why law? Well, we're graduating liberal lawyers who become activist judges, and I would say usurp the authority of the other two branches as they legislate from the bench. Journalism, college of journalism, we have very few journalists nowadays. They're generally advocates. Now, our advocates openly admit it. They're on talk radio and say they're pundits. They say they are talking and they're giving you their opinions. The advocates on the left try and disguise themselves as journalists. They're not, they're advocates. When they don't interview me, they argue with me. One of the reasons I talk so fast, if I go on something like Chuck Todd's Meet the Press, and I can't even get a full sentence in before he's interrupting me because he doesn't want to hear what I have to say. You compare that to how he would interview, let's say, a Democrat senator from some other state, ask them a softball question, sit back and listen to it for 5 minutes. So again, we don't have an unbiased media. We have a highly biased media. And then, of course, College of Education, we have been churning out leftists as teachers for decades, which is why we're now in this position in this country, unbelievably, where you have school administrators that are injecting our children with gender-blocking drugs and refuse to tell their parents. Why our daughters are having to compete with biological males, and there's just a decision handed down that the biological male has to be able to shower with them in the girls' locker room. Now, I view this as insane, but this is where we're at. So again, I'm just setting the plate here for telling you how we got in a situation. Now let me talk about the three branches within the federal government. Because we don't have to balance the books, because we don't have to balance the budget, because we can print money, well, it didn't take very long for members of Congress to realize, the public, the voters, they love benefits. And I'm going to promise them those benefits. And I don't have to really worry about paying for them. And I'm not exactly sure where that, we used to be more fiscally responsible. $100 billion used to sound like a lot of money. I knew when we were in trouble when we went from hundreds of billions to trillions. I was just talking about $1 trillion or $2 $1.25 trillion, $250 billion. Just doesn't sound like that much. It's a massive amount of money. And we are accumulating debt at an obviously unsustainable level. But anyway, so that's one problem with the legislature. The other problem is to evade accountability. Past Congresses have willingly, and I mean willingly, given up their constitutional authority. Our founders thought they would jealously guard it, right? I mean, you all heard Nancy Pelosi a year ago clearly state President Biden has no authority to cancel student debt. That has to come through the legislature. She was very firm about it. But she's highly supportive of the president usurping her constitutional authority on that. Congresses. So again, to evade responsibility, Congress has passed can't even call them laws anymore. They're frameworks. They've got a nice little title, like the Inflation Reduction Act, of course, does the exact opposite, or the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, that just basically grants the executive the authority to fill in the blanks. We've given you the goal. We want to protect patients and make healthcare more affordable. Take it away, Mr. President. And of course, presidents happily take that authority. So over the decades, that presidential power has just grown and grown and grown and grown. Congress keeps spending more money they don't have, mortgaging our children's future. And the judiciary now stocked, not right now, but prior to us getting a conservative majority, stocked with activist jurists, love to legislate from the bench. They love to have their opinion dictate policy for the rest of America. So that's where we're at in this country. It's a big mess. It's a huge mess. I really ought to have people introduce me, warn audiences, I'm not the most uplifting character. I told, by the way, when I ran 2010, I told two promises. I gave two promises to Wisconsinites. I'll always tell you the truth. I'll never vote, and by extension, I'll never conduct myself with my reelection mind. I have scrupulously honored those promises. Now, a lot of truths people don't want to hear. Sorry, I tell you the truth, and right now the reality is not that pleasant. The reality is we have a second president now who ran on a platform that he's going to fundamentally transform America. President Obama did the exact same thing. I do ask audiences, do you even like, let's just love something you're going to fundamentally transform? The example I use is I wake up in the morning, I look at my wife, Jane, I love you, and I'm going to change everything about you. You need a little fundamental transformation. That wouldn't go over very well. Of course you don't like, much less love something you want to fundamentally transform. And unfortunately now we're seeing what that fundamental transformation looks like. Open borders. About 3 million people have come to this country illegally. They've been encountered. Don't even call it apprehensions. It's so efficient. Encountered, processed, and dispersed, or entered as a known or unknown godly. About 3 million people. That's a number larger than the population of 17 states. That's the magnitude of this crisis problem that the administration will only say, well, it's a challenge. The flood of illegal drugs, deadly drugs. Local sheriffs used to have to, shut down meth labs up here in Wisconsin or Minnesota. Not anymore. The meth labs are out of business because it's so much easier and cheaper to get methamphetamine from our porous border. 40-year high inflation. You realize a dollar you held at the start of the Biden administration is worth 88.3 cents. That's how you inflate your way out of $30.8 trillion of debt. It's the start of what I would consider a financial crisis. Record gas prices. You notice they're going back up? I guess they probably drained the petroleum, the strategic petroleum reserve enough. It's the lowest level since about 1984. That's here for national emergencies, not to help Joe Biden and his Democrats get reelected. But they're kind of right. I guess they're thinking they can't release too much more or other factors. And now that price is going up on purpose. People have to understand, none of these things just happen. It's not like Biden is just unlucky. This is the direct result of their policies, the open border, the inflation, the massive out-of-control deficit spending sparking the inflation, the high energy costs, record gas prices, rising crime. What do you expect when you have a goal of releasing 50% of the prison population in Wisconsin? When you parole 44 child rapists, 270 criminals who primarily committed or attempted murder? What do you expect when you let criminals out without bail? What do you expect when you dispirit police by saying you want to defund them? Eliminate them? How easy do you think it is for people to hire sheriffs to hire new deputies? It's getting very difficult. So we're seeing this fundamental transformation, and what I would argue, it's fundamentally destroying this country. And that's what we're up against. It's not a fair fight. Again, they hold the education system. They hold the vast majority of our media. They lie with impunity. I mean, certainly, I'm on the receiving end of those lies. 2 solid years of it. And let's face it, lies taint you. Somebody tells a lie about you, no matter how false it is. Is that true? It puts a question in somebody's, it's evil. It's despicable. It's despicable how they try and scare seniors. Telling them election after election after election that one side of the aisle is going to take away your Social Security. End it, cut it. Nobody's ever said that. I've never said that. I want to save it. I'm trying to point out that the only way we save it is we have to stop spending money on things like the Green New Deal energy boondoggles. We can't afford $369 billion. That will do nothing. This will be wasted. So anyway, that's the sorry state. What do we have going for us? That one essential ingredient. What this institution is named for. What more than 1 million of the finest among us have fought and died for. There's a big difference between the parties. I mean, one side, the Democrats think government did this for us, right? You didn't build that, government did. They want to grow government. They want to take more of our freedom away. We know what made this country great. It's people like you. Getting up every day, going to work, no matter what you do, and contributing. But you use that one essential ingredient, freedom, to dream and aspire and build and create this marvel. And it is a marvel that we call America. That's why you're sitting here tonight, on a beautiful day. Because you understand that. You understand it is in peril. It is in peril. This is a hinge point in history. It's why I decided to run again. Trust me, I wanted to go home. The dysfunction is so profound, it's like, ugh. But just like you, I can't turn my back on this country. It is something so rare and so precious in the span of human history. And it's just such a shame that so many of our fellow citizens don't appreciate it. I haven't talked about this poll recently, but there was one given, a couple months ago, quite a few months ago. And no matter how they slice and dice this demographically, age, every group had at least more than half, in some way, shape, or form, said they love this country, except for one. Young people. Now, they didn't grow up with an automatic bias against this marvel we call America. That was taught to them. That was indoctrinated in them. So again, that's why I am so appreciative of this institution and the fact that it's named for that one essential ingredient. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you've got.
Well, we've collected a lot of those. Senator, it was 10 years ago to this very year that we brought you here, and of all the people in the state we could have brought, we wanted to bring you because you are a Valley person. You have a long record of supporting businesses and entrepreneurship and education. So to have you back here 10 years later when we've grown tenfold since then, I think it's a testament to this American spirit. And I want to thank you, but I know you're going to have to leave precipitously at some point, but I wanted to get that in.
Listen, until you give me the hook, I'll stick around.
Oh, okay, good. All right. Be careful what you ask for. I want to start selfishly with my question, in case I don't get it in. Every Republican candidate, every Republican president since Ronald Reagan has promised if they took power, they would get rid of the Department of Education. Is this really just cake for the masses? They tell us that. Is it even possible?
I wish it were. If somebody was going to do it, then Ronald Reagan, I think he's one of the first people to promise that he wasn't able to do it. There's so very few bureaucrats serving the agencies. Again, this is different in state government. Federal government's different. Very few people in federal bureaucracies, staff members of Congress or members of Congress, have any experience in, which means little to no knowledge of, and maybe even worse, very little sympathy for the private sector. And they look at business as easy. It's easy to become a billionaire. You guys make so much money, you're abusing your customers, your employees. We've got to write the laws to make you behave. And we got to tax you so that we can dole out those benefits to our constituents. So that's a real problem. Maybe even worse is that so very few have ever even been part of a functioning organization. I want you to let that seep in. Again, you're in the private sector. You know what a functioning organization is, right? You've got a company or a nonprofit. It's got a mission and vision statement. It sets annual goals. You have different functions. You got your accountant, you got your plant manager, you got your engineer, everybody kind of knows what they're trying to do. You're making product that I can sell, and take a look at how dysfunctional government is. I'm assuming that state legislature is not particularly functional either. Again, government's just not very functional, which is why you turn over all this power to the executive, hoping that somebody can get things right, but they don't. So again, I wish I could say it's going to be very easy. That's why, from my standpoint, what we need to do, and I'm going to be pushing for this hard, I want to bring function back in. I don't want to serve another 6 years with this dysfunction. So I'm going to try and impose on our leadership, if we get the majority, a budget process. Here we are, end of the year. End of the fiscal year, we had never brought up one appropriation bill. Instead, we did this massive CR again, get us through till before the end of the year, when they can pass this 2,000, 3,000 page omnibus. They'll put every little frickin' ornament on that Christmas tree they can think of. And unfortunately, 22 Republicans voted for that as well. I've got 4 bills in mind. And this would actually tie into what Duke asked me here. First of all, full faith and credit. We will never default on our debt. Preventing Government Shutdown Act, do what Wisconsin does. If you're dysfunctional, you don't fund an agency, don't shut it down. Just fund it at last year's levels. Then the REINS Act, which is a powerful tool to rein in costly regulations. And the final one was a piece of legislation I first introduced in 2012 with Mick Mulvaney, reducing the size of the federal government through Attrition Act. Don't have to fire anybody, just quit hiring them. It's amazing how quickly you'd start shrinking government. It's like they're not doing that much stuff anyway. They're doing way too much stuff, but not that much work. Okay, a lot of harm, but not that much work. Start consolidating that, start shrinking them. That'd be one way. By the way, if you follow that budget process, then once you've done that, pass the debt. I doubt Democrats are going to pass the debt ceiling with us, whatever. But you come back in April and you bring up the appropriation bills in order of priority. I'd start with defense, then veterans, then probably HHS. You get all the way down. I'd probably bring up education last. Wouldn't it be awful if we ran out of money? So you understand kind of the thought process I have on here. But you got to impose some kind of discipline. It's the only way this is going to happen.
Thank This is, I think, an important question. We don't even know how many prisoners are being held without representation from January 6th. It seems in many respects that they almost are political prisoners with no justice being given to them, regardless of what they may have done. What are you doing to help these people, and what should we be doing to try to get them their day in court?
I think there is an enormous amount of injustice occurring right now. Whatever happened to your right to a fair and speedy trial? Okay? Now, we have seen a jaw-dropping, a stunning level of politicization of the federal agencies. You know, we saw it with Lois Lerner, the IRS, where they weaponized the IRS, that awesome, powerful agency, against their political opponents. And now Biden's doing it with Department of Justice, FBI. Well, I mean, they already were politicized. How else do you explain the Russian collusion hoax and the corrupt FBI investigation? And quite honestly, the FBI setting me up to smear me, accusing me of soliciting and disseminating Russian disinformation. So there is enormous corruption in these agencies. And it's something that we have to push back against. It's one of the things, if I do win, if we do the majority, I'd be the chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. I'd like to say, if I'm there, I'll be like a mosquito in a nudist colony. It'll be a target-rich environment. But no, this is, listen, none of us, we all condemn the violence on January 6th, but we also condemn the violence in 570 riots during the summer, right? 2,000 law enforcement officers injured, $1 to $2 billion of damage, a couple dozen people killed, including a couple in Kenosha. We condemn that. So, those that committed violence, I want to see prosecuted. You have to. I mean, I can't. I don't have much power. I've written letters to Mayor Garland, say, well, how have you treated January 6th versus the summer rioters? And I've got other senators to sign on. It's been publicized. He just ignores it. And without a unbiased media, there's no pressure on him to answer those questions. So we kind of have to rely on their defense attorneys, and unfortunately, I don't think they have the best defense. A lot of public defenders, I've heard reports that public defenders are trying to, re-indoctrinate their clients. So no, it's a huge injustice that's occurring right now, and it'll probably take another president to try and uncover it.
Based on what you just said, this question is germane here. So with the power you will have if you are re-elected and you have a majority, will you actively support the impeachment of Biden and Merrick Garland?
Well, first of all, I'm in the Senate. That's up to the House. And whatever the House does, then we'll have to deal with it. I will tell you there's no way you're going to be able to convict them in the Senate. So I guess, personally, I'd rather devote our attention on exposing the truth and keep digging. But understand how difficult that is. I subpoenaed Christopher Wray of the FBI with a Republican president in power, with the Republican president that wanted those documents released. We never got them. That's why I've been, people say, oh, don't call it a deep state. No, it's a very deep state. It's a very deep state, and it is populated by leftists. Again, it's not a fair fight. It's not a level playing field. We have the truth. We've got us. It's got we the people. It has to start in November.
Thank you. We have 5 different questions that ask the same question, so it seems to be on a lot of people's mind. Can we actually move forward, even if we have the majority, with McConnell running the Senate?
So I think I laid out my game plan there, right? I will want to use, this will be I've been there, it'll be 12 years. I'm within our conference, I'm gaining more and more seniority and more influence. And you have to believe, I think it was Dan Henninger from the Wall Street Journal said I was frank to a fault. I'm even more frank inside our conference, okay? So I'll be pushing hard, and I chose the word carefully. I'm going to try and impose this discipline on our leadership, a different governing model. Yeah, I don't know who's going to be our leader. I think it's, realistically, I don't know whether it's going to be possible to change leadership. But we certainly can get, I think, our conference to impose a different governing model and that kind of schedule, which, listen, everybody has its pluses and minuses. I think we all agree that McConnell did a pretty good job on judges, right? Okay, did a pretty good job defending the filibuster. He makes mincemeat out of Schumer on the floor. So again, let's look at people in total. I mean, everybody has pluses and minuses, and I'll leave it at that.
It's obvious, and a number of questions asked this, that the rhetoric coming from the highest level, including the president, is dangerous in a way that we haven't seen before. Once the Republicans take control again, will there be any consequences for that over-the-top dangerous rhetoric?
Yeah. So first of all, it is important that we all recognize the Democrats, this is their standard playbook, right? But by the way, I always think of the movie Patton with George C. Scott. Say, Rommel, you magnificent, fill in the blank. I read your book. Well, we can read their book. It's called Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radical. That's what they're following them. That's their playbook. Okay, so we know what they're going to do. One of their classic plays here is to falsely accuse the other side of doing exactly what they're doing. So they do that. So we're not the side that's dividing this country. We're not the angry side. I'm looking out here, got a lot of smiles on faces, right? We're concerned. We're passionate about trying to save this country. But we're not the angry ones. That's the other side. They are dividing us. Now, I will say, I don't want to become them. I don't want to become them. Somebody in this equation is going to have to be the adult. Somebody's going to have to be the better angel. And again, I don't say you don't fight hard, and I think I fight and push pretty hard. But I think the way we try and win is with the truth. It has its own power. Truth has its own power. It's about getting it out. But it's also about supporting institutions like this, and then also talking to every friend, every family member, disseminating the information that is available on the internet. We still do have free speech. We still have a pretty free and wide open internet. There is censorship in this, wrong, but you can send all kinds of things to all kinds of people and start educating them. We just need more people with their eyes open. And like Mark Levin says in his book, American Marxism, we must awaken to the urgency of the moment. This is an urgent moment. So.
No money for border agents, 87,000 new IRS agents. Why are we spending seemingly untold billions on Ukraine?
So first of all, here's the good news. If we do win, I could almost guarantee, I don't do this normally because I like to underpromise, overdeliver. I have a hard time thinking that those 87,000 IRS agents will not be rescinded. Okay? I would think one of the first pieces of legislation we introduced in both the House and the Senate is to repeal those 87,000 agents. And it's going to be a little bit easier because it's going to be very tough to hire 87,000 agents. So I think we have time. I think we can end that. Obviously, I voted against this last CR where there was more funding. I certainly wanted an accounting of where the money is going. Now, one thing too is just the accounting of this. We're not buying weapons with that $12 billion, whatever they put in this thing, and then saying we're just giving them our weapons. What the money is probably doing is replenishing our stock, which we better do. So one of the reasons I voted for the first 40, because I knew that's the dynamic here. And I knew that, again, the President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief. There's really no constraints of what he can do with the military and military assets. So I knew he was dedicated to doing that. He was going to be sending those arms, which, by the way, I'm quite sympathetic with. I hope you all are too. I've spent a fair amount of time over in Ukraine. I've talked to Ukrainians. I've been in the Maidan. Shortly after 100 plus were slaughtered by Putin's puppet there. The people of Ukraine, yes, there's corruption there. But it was described to me one time by the new prosecutor general under Zelensky. He said, Ron, we've got 22,000 prosecutors. We don't pay them very well at all, and yet they live like kings. Do you understand? So does that, that's the kind of endemic corruption there is that the Ukrainian people want to get rid of. That's why they elected Zelensky. He ran on a platform to defeat corruption. But it's very difficult to do. Again, it's just like I can't get into the federal government and fix it all. It's very difficult. You have all the vested interests there. But when you've got somebody as evil as Putin committing the atrocities and war crimes, and you've got people who just want what we want freedom. You want opportunity, prosperity for their children, and they're willing to fight and die for it, I'm sorry. I think America ought to support them. Now, we need to be careful. I don't think we should be engaging. We don't want a shooting war between Russia and America, but I'd like to see this war wind down. I'd like it ended. But I don't have it in my heart to tell Ukrainian people, no, we're not going to support you. But we'll let Putin overrun you. We'll let him commit those war crimes and atrocities. I think as Americans, we need to support freedom-loving people. Wherever they are, we need to support them. Because if we don't, the world becomes a very bad and dangerous place. We are the indispensable power. We are. We've been a phenomenal force for good in the world. Aren't you proud of the fact? I mean, I hate the fact that we've had to send our sons and daughters across the world. I hate the fact that so many have died. But aren't you pretty proud of the fact that America sends its sons and daughters not to conquer land? As Colin Powell said, the only land we ever asked for is enough to bury our dead. We're doing it to help people have better lives. And it's a phenomenal reflection on how good Americans are. Let's not turn our back on freedom-loving people.
From the audience, Senator Johnson, you have a great track record with our veterans. What will you do to get rid of mask mandates, vaccine mandates, and critical race theory out of our cadets?
I've done an awful lot. There's very few people as outspoken as I've been in terms of how our miserable failure dealing with COVID. And it's been a miserable failure. Now, I wrote an op-ed in USA Today. This is interesting how they do this. Say, hey, we heard you talk about not shutting down the highways, and we heard Fauci rip you up from the podium. You want to write a counter to us saying we want to shut the economy down? They don't show me theirs. I just have to, they give me 300 words, which really isn't squat. So I wrote that on March 30th, 2020. So I was opposed to shutdowns there. Been opposed to masks ever since I found out they don't work, and they don't work. Fauci knew that, but it was a method of control. I was pushing for early treatment. I mean, that is the scandal of our handling of COVID, because I'm connected to this global network of eminently qualified doctors and researchers. And they firmly believe that hundreds of thousands of people, just in America, lost their lives because they're denied early treatment, because the Faucis of the world, other people, sabotage early treatment with a cornucopia full, by the way, of cheap, generic drugs that work. Okay, I know they work because I've referred a lot of people to it, and I followed up their progress, and man, oxygen levels from 84 to 98 within 6 hours. The stuff works, but it was denied, okay? So yeah, I've been at the forefront of this. I've also been the only advocate for the vaccine injured. But we're up over 31,000 deaths on the VAERS system worldwide, 31,000. That compares so per year is about 17,000 a year. That compares to 15 deaths per year for ivermectin, less than 80 with hydroxychloroquine, less than 80 with the standard flu vaccine. 26.5% of those deaths are occurring on day 0, 1, or 2. Again, all I'm trying to do is give people information. I haven't said whether you should or shouldn't take the vaccine. I just think the American public needs to know the information. And I think our federal health agencies and our medical establishment needs to at least admit there's a possibility in some people the vaccine either killed them or maimed them and they need treatment. That's all I'm saying. So I think it's been a travesty. So I think you can understand my passion here. It's one of the main reasons I did decide to run again, because nobody else is advocating for the vaccine injured, and I don't want them losing a voice inside Washington. They need a voice. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. And by the way, I'm the guy that has armed the finest among us, our soldiers, with the information that they are not being administered a FDA-approved drug as the executive order demands. Again, you can't get the information out of this, but I am highly doubtful that any of the vaccine that is being administered in the U.S. is FDA approved. They approve something that's being manufactured somewhere else in probably pretty small lots, and they just call them interchangeable. But ask me why they didn't give those full FDA approval. Is it because of the liability protection? I don't know. We just can't get answers out of this administration. There's been no honesty, no transparency from our federal health agencies, which is why we no longer trust them, which is a tragedy in and of itself, okay?
I know a great deal of people here, all of us, I think, are tremendous promoters of the local police. We recognize the danger of federalized police. The question is, why are Republicans promoting federalized police through grants and having the feds hire hundreds of thousands of officers?
Well, I don't. I think there has been an effort to go, just respond to public pressure in terms of training, some grant money that way. But I'm not looking for a federal police force. We need to investigate the federal law enforcement we have that's been thoroughly corrupted. So no, the overall solution here is over time devolved power out of the federal government back to the states, which is what's pretty well dictated by the 10th Amendment. I'll never be able to memorize that thing because it's just it's 18th century writing, but it basically says the federal government will do what the federal government's supposed to do as enumerated in the Constitution. All other governing authority, the vast majority of it goes to the states, and the power resides with the people. And that's a model that we've turned on top of its head. We've got to get back to that model because it's a model that works. Local government, state government's more accountable, it's more efficient, it's more effective. That's where government ought to occur, and that includes law enforcement.
This is one that has come up a lot here. It's a very, very important question. Everybody here has talked about the Constitution, and you talked about it. Hopefully our new Supreme Court Justice has talked about it. The Constitution, the country is nothing without the Constitution. But many would seek a constitutional con, so to speak, a constitutional convention to potentially alter that Constitution. Where do you stand on the issue?
So I would support a convention of the states, but the way I would structure it would be we've already got the constitutional amendment agreed on. We gavel in, agree to it, gavel out. I would not want to do a wide open convention of states. I just wouldn't. As much as I respect people like Mark Levin, who's written a book, and as appealing as maybe some of those constitutional amendments might be, the one I would want is kind of where I started with. And I wouldn't do a balanced budget amendment because there'd have to be waivers, and trust me, Congress would weasel around those things in a second. What I would want to do is I would want to set a spending limitation as a percentage of GDP and stick to that. Because we get, and I'd probably somewhere around 18% of GDP would be my guess, moving average of the last 3 fiscal years or something. I mean, this gets into bean counting and stuff, but that is because to me, that is the main problem with the federal government right now is we can print all this money. And so government has just expanded. Just quick, before COVID, we'd spent about $4.4 trillion. I think when I first entered office, it was about 3.3, I think. So we're up to 4.4 in 2019, 2020, 6.5, 2021, 6.8. And now, pandemic's over, according to Biden. This year we'll spend about 5.9 trillion. I don't know what Democrats have in mind for 2022, but it just ratchets only one direction and it just sticks there. We've got to break that habit.
I think we got one more. I think is a nice one. Obviously, whatever happens in the fall, the last 2 years of the Biden administration, he's been reckless so far. He has no reason not to be much more reckless. As somebody who's on the inside watching this, what is the biggest unknown thing that we haven't seen yet that a out-of-control Joe Biden administration might try to do in the next 2 years?
Well, I mean, the biggest concern, and Robert Gates, who was President Obama's defense secretary, said that in his book that Joe Biden has been wrong on every major foreign policy decision for 40 years and his string's unbroken. Again, Putin would not have invaded Ukraine had Trump won a second term. Just wouldn't have happened. We would have had the embarrassing and dangerous surrender in Afghanistan, together with all these other things that weaken this country, to entice him to do it. You wouldn't see, I don't think, President Xi eyeing up Taiwan, or Iran being as aggressive, or North Korea. So my biggest concern with, again, if I can get my Republican colleagues to go along, if we have the majority, we can restrain spending. We can stop the basic agenda. But in terms of foreign policy, again, it's commander-in-chief. Who knows what that might mean over the next couple of years. Listen, very perilous times. Now, I don't trust the guy, and unfortunately, he's surrounded with the same advisors who have been advising him incorrectly for the last 4 years as well. Sorry, that's really a depressing note. Sorry, but you all know what we're up against here. You know what's on the ballot. I mean, my race is truth versus lies, distortion, character assassination, politics, personal destruction. But what's really on the ballot is freedom. And it's a fight for freedom. It's not somebody else's fight, it's ours, and it's a fight we absolutely have to win. So God bless all of you. Take care.